Every day, some 80,000 vehicles pass effortlessly beneath the tidal waters of a great river. Their drivers hardly give it a second thought. To them, it's just part of their route from A to B, something they can safely take for granted. A few moments' interruption to a radio program, a temporary suspension of the prevailing weather. But as you prepare to enter these subterranean corridors of fluorescent stripes, a rite of passage is being granted not only between a maritime city and its urban satellites, but also between the portals of two of the engineering and architectural masterpieces of the 20th century. Queensway, better known as the Birkenhead Tunnel, is 60 years old. Together with the more youthful Kingsway or Wallasey Tunnel, it carries traffic from the east to the west shores of the River Mersey, connecting a finger of land known as the Wirral Peninsula with central Liverpool. Altogether, nearly 25 million cars, lorries, coaches and motorbikes pass through the tunnels annually, helping to boost the economy of a region which has seen more than its fair share of problems over recent years. When you descend into the lonely, almost melancholy reaches of Queensway, it's easy to forget that the Mersey tunnels employ around 350 people. So where are they? Well, if you trace the curving line of Queensway from its New Quay entrance towards Pier Head, you'll find George's Dock Building, resplendent in its newly cleaned Art Deco style. Here, clustered around one of Queensway's 6 ventilating stations, are the main offices, where management of the 2 tunnels is coordinated and personnel allocated to any one of the 3 divisions: operations, maintenance or administration.
On the 1st of April 1986, the responsibility for operating the tunnels passed to Merseyside Passenger Transport Authority, which shortly afterwards adopted the trading name of Mersey Travel. Mersey Travel has been responsible for operating and maintaining the tunnels for the last 8 years, and in that time has brought about many significant improvements. Because of the improvements, the traffic today is running at about 24.5 million vehicles a year through the 2 tunnels combined, and 12 million vehicles a year through the Queensway Tunnel.
Operations covers all the law enforcement, breakdown recovery and tolls collection duties that are essential to the smooth running of the tunnel system. And for customers, the most likely point of contact with tunnel staff is at the toll booths. But even here, the work is becoming less labour-intensive with the increasing use of automatic pay stations and sophisticated new fast-tag electronic cards for regular tunnel users.
All motorists are buying the fast-tag, and they're finding that they can go through the lane very, very quickly. It's a cashless transaction. Also, they get debited once a month as regards the journeys they've done, and it's also cost-effective for the tunnels, and it's something we feel that will spread throughout the country as a means of getting rid of cash completely, but this is quite a long time yet.
So, in the meantime,
once the coin has been deposited in the toll box, it is then conveyed underground by a pneumatic conveying system that was jointly developed by the Mersey Tunnels and Pneumatic Conveying Systems. This takes the coinage to the cash room, where it is deposited ready for counting.
And in 1993, the tunnels together banked around £25 million. Back above ground, a constant check is kept on the flow of traffic through each tunnel from a control room bristling with TV monitors, safety alarm systems and communications equipment. It's here they make the decision about which lanes and toll booths should be operational in each direction, depending on traffic conditions known as the tidal flow, coordinate the tunnel's police or breakdown services in the event of an incident occurring within the tunnel or on the approach roads, and keep a weather eye out for anything irregular or suspect. Working in close cooperation with Merseyside Police, suspicious vehicles are frequently tracked as they pass through the tunnels, sometimes with unexpected results.
An incident can happen any time of the day. We're open 24 hours a day, and there's a need. If there may be a serious incident, we have a close relationship with all these emergency services, and there's a need for us to call on them. Consequently, We have to maintain a high state of alert. We've had recorded incidents in the past of fatal traffic accidents, oil spillages, all kinds of serious incidents. Our officers are immediately on the scene, and on occasions we rely on the input from emergency fire services, Merseyside police, bomb disposal experts. Whatever the incident may be, we then need to call in the required assistance.
The Mersey Tunnels is one of the few organisations to run its own private police force. Established under an Act of Parliament, the force has essentially the same powers as the Crown Police within and around the tunnels. Its main role is to help the public with any problems they might have and to ensure that traffic flows quickly and safely through the tunnels. So, an officer may have to deal with anything from an elderly driver with an attack of nerves to a boy racer with a surfeit of adrenaline.
The primary function of the police officer patrolling the Mersey tunnels and the approach roads is to ensure that traffic wishing to travel from one side of the River Mersey to the other do so as quickly and as safely as possible. Our role is to deal with anything that stops the traffic from so doing. This can range from a broken down vehicle, a vehicle that's shed part of its load, a drunken driver, somebody travelling in excess of the speed limit or crossing from one lane to the other. A recruit joining the Mersey Tunnel Police now receives a training of a 9-week duration in the classroom and 2 months of what we call operational training out on the road, actually dealing with things like diversions and things of this nature. Due to a recent Royal Commission with regards to the taped interviewing of suspects, our officers are now going through a training session of 2 days per week to ensure that the standards set down within the Royal Commission are met.
With their own border controls and police force, the Mersey Tunnels seem almost like a state within a state. Indeed, the extent to which they can function as a self-contained unit was impressively demonstrated during December 1993, when the whole of Liverpool city centre ground to a halt due to a massive power failure. In the tunnels there was hardly a flicker, as the standby generators took over the task of powering thousands of fluorescent tubes, along with ventilation stations, pumps, and a vast array of other tunnel equipment. But all this hardware has to be looked after by someone.
We're now in the ventilation control room centre. The primary function of this particular control room is to ensure that the CO levels are monitored very carefully in the tunnel. Also, to take into account the lighting situation in the tunnel. We have atmospheric instruments installed here in this ventilation control room that gives us a very accurate guide as to the pollution levels in the tunnels.
Carbon monoxide, smoke, dust and so on must all be kept within strict tolerances, and the huge fans sucking clean air in and discharging polluted air to the environment beyond the shafts can cope with a theoretical flow of more than 6,000 vehicles an hour. If jams or slow-moving traffic cause pollution levels to rise and the carbon monoxide levels are nudging the 100 parts per million upper limit, the engineers will advise the tunnel's police, who will begin to control traffic flows or, if necessary, close the tunnel until the all clear is given. But it's not only air pollution that can cause problems. Back in 1991, engineers were given a large headache and very wet feet when Queensway was flooded.
A burst water main in William Brown Street sent 500,000 gallons of water cascading down through the tunnel portals. And this obviously found its way down to Mid-River, which is the lowest point. And at that time, the Mid-River pump room was flooded out, so we couldn't pump the water out by ourselves. The fire brigade came in on an emergency basis, but their pumps just can't handle this sort of capacity. We hired in some pumps and we coupled into the fire main, and we pumped the water from the Mid-River section up to George's Dock pump room, and then using our own pumps again, we pumped it from the George's Dock pump room into the River Mersey. This, of course, left the tunnel closed over the weekend period until we got the water cleared out.
The Mid-River pump room is in one of the lowest points in the Queensway Tunnel, and the inrush of water therefore totally submerged the pumps and partly submerged the control gear. Subsequent to the flood, a complete survey was undertaken in the pump room to assess the damage, and in consequence the pumps were dismantled, refurbished, reassembled. The control panel, etc., was damage beyond reasonable repair, and it was necessary to arrange for new control equipment to be installed.
So you can see that there's more to the Mersey tunnels than a few pence in a slot machine and a couple of holes in the ground. But how, and indeed why, were these great monuments to civil engineering built? To see the full picture, we need to add another dimension: time. Let's now take a step or two back into history and look at how some of the twists of fate and circumstance have brought us to where we are today. As Chester's port declined with the silting up of the River Dee, and the port of Liverpool grew, eventually to become second city of the empire in Victorian times, so the need for the ferries increased. And as time wore on, more and more people became commuters, choosing to live in the relative tranquility of Wirral while travelling to work in the city. The idea of a tunnel crossing was first mooted back in 1825 at the time of Sir Mark Brunel's plan to drive a tunnel under the Thames from Rotherhithe to Wapping. Like so many far-sighted British ideas, it came to nothing. But half a century later, with railway enthusiasm at its peak, the Mersey Railway Company was authorised to link the mainline tracks on either side of the river. By 1886, the engineering problems had been solved and the tunnel was opened to passenger-carrying steam trains of the newly formed Mersey Railway. Despite foul conditions in the poorly ventilated tunnel, the railway immediately halved the Birkenhead ferries traffic, and the writing was on the wall. Today, over a century later, the Mersey Railway is at the heart of an extensive electric network, providing ample justification for the foresight of those early tunnel pioneers. But with the railway limited to passenger transport, that still left the problem of goods traffic. The nearest bridge was 20 miles upstream at Warrington, and although towards the end of Victoria's reign a transporter bridge, a strange device rather like a horizontal lift, was constructed to link Widnes and Runcorn, this had a limited capacity and was still many miles away from where the main crossing was needed. In any event, even though the transporter could carry goods as well as passengers, horse-drawn traffic still had to rely on the goods ferries, or luggage boats as they became known, and this wasn't always ideal. Crossings were often disrupted because of fog or gales, and capacity was limited. As the volume of traffic rose inexorably, and this was still largely horse-drawn until well into the 1920s, delays became more and more frequent, causing traffic chaos on both sides of the Mersey and a stranglehold on the economic development of both Wirral and Liverpool. Something had to be done. Bridge or tunnel? That was the question. Plans for a bridge, 90 feet wide, 2,200 feet between spans, and arching 185 feet above the river, were seriously considered. But with the experience of the Great War fresh in people's minds, the scheme was rejected on the grounds of vulnerability to air attack and cost, a staggering £10.5 million. So it had to be a tunnel. In the early 1920s, a joint committee of the local authorities of Liverpool, Birkenhead, Wallasey and Bootle was set up under the chairmanship of Sir Archibald Salvage, leader of Liverpool City Council. They studied proposals for a 44-foot diameter tunnel with 4 9-foot traffic lanes in the upper section. In the lower section would run a double-line tramway designed to link new underground tramways providing a through service from Everton via Liverpool city centre to Wallasey. This, the experts said, would cost under £6.5 million and would even include 2 entrances at either end. But not everyone was persuaded of the scheme's merits. There was no great surprise when objections were received from the Mersey Railway and Birkenhead Corporation ferries, who were both worried about loss of trade, and also from Mersey Docks and Harbour Board, concerned over the effects of dock developments in Wallasey. But it came as something of a shock when, after a lukewarm response from Wallasey to the project, the planned Wallasey link to the tunnel was scrapped, and the borough was effectively out of the reckoning. The proposal for the tramway also died with this decision. As a further snub to Wallasey, compensation for loss of ferry revenues was restricted to the Birkenhead ferries only, who were given protection for at least 21 years. But despite all this, opposition continued, and so the project was put to the people. Only Bootle voiced any real opposition, and in a poor turnout at the polls, rejected the scheme by 156 votes, leaving Liverpool and Birkenhead to go it alone, with a little grudging assistance from His Majesty's government. A bill was laid before Parliament, and royal assent received on the 8th of August 1925. Basil Mott, the designer, and John Brodie were appointed as joint engineers, and on the 16th of December that year, Princess Mary set in motion the first battery of 14 pneumatic drills for the sinking of a shaft at George's Dock. A similar shaft was started at Birkenhead on the 10th of March 1926, with Sir Archibald turning the first sod. But all was not plain sailing. Arguments raged on while the excavations continued. The main squabble was now over the proposed entrances on either side, and it required a further 2 royal assents before everything was finalised. Meanwhile, 2 pilot tunnels on parallel headings, each the size of a London Underground tunnel, were being pushed out towards one another. Link-up finally came on the 3rd of April 1928, when the Lord Mayor of Liverpool, Margaret Bevan, Sir Archibald Salvage, and other members of the Joint Committee met the Mayor of Birkenhead, Alderman Naylor, at the point of breakthrough, with all clad in oilskins and sou'westers. Once the echoes of the speeches had died away, the work began again in earnest. As the main 46-foot tunnel progressed, cast iron segments were used to line the tunnel walls and provide the strength needed. Everything went well. Geologists' surveys had proved to be accurate, and water seepage was within acceptable limits. But then, on the 29th of October 1930, disaster struck, and a fair-sized chunk of Dale Street disappeared into the excavation below, not far from the present tunnel entrance. Apparently, the line of the tunnel had crossed old earthen fortifications dating back to the time of Cromwell. Traffic was disrupted, but the tunnel work continued unabated, and it was even hoped that the tunnel might be completed early. However, fate was having none of that. Still in the autumn of 1930, reports came through from America of a number of people being gassed in a smaller road tunnel there. Although fortunately the effects weren't fatal, alarm bells began to ring as people realized the potential for carbon monoxide poisoning in heavy traffic. Experts were dispatched to America to visit numerous tunnels there, while here, using a walled-off 1,000-foot section of the tunnel under Hamilton Square, Birkenhead, every conceivable test was carried out. The results were conclusive. The proposed ventilation system was hopelessly inadequate. 6 new ventilation shafts would be needed. Local architect Herbert J. Rouse was appointed to design the buildings, and the resulting structures are a tribute to his ingenuity. Inside, huge fans up to 28 feet in diameter draw in air through the sides of the towers and pump it via ducts in the lower tunnel up to road level. The exhaust air is then sucked out through the tunnel roof to be vented at the top of the towers. For the engineering-minded, this is known as the upward semi-transverse system. The cost of all this additional work? Over £2 million, bringing the total cost of the tunnel to around £7.75 million. Tolls would have to operate for 40 years, and it would take 80 years to repay the borrowing. But there was no going back now, and no cutting corners. Following his success with the ventilation buildings, Herbert Rouse was asked to design the final architectural features for the tunnel entrances and interior. The 4 portals, the cast iron toll booths, arched pylons providing staff accommodation, and the lighting columns. These grand architectural statements, 60 feet high, are in fact hollow columns constructed from reinforced concrete covered in fluted, polished granite and surmounted by gilded glazed bowls. Inside, the black glass lining of the tunnel walls at road level was chosen by Rouse for its ease of cleaning and good reflective properties. Before opening to traffic, pedestrians were invited to walk through on 2 occasions, the proceeds going to charity. Early on the 18th of July 1934, a day of brilliant sunshine, the crowds began to gather outside the Liverpool entrance to the tunnel in Old Haymarket, eventually numbering almost 200,000. They'd come to see King George V and Queen Mary perform the opening ceremony. Lord Derby, Lord Lieutenant of Lancashire, was in charge of arrangements. On the way, the King stopped to officially open Walton Hall Park. Well before the King and Queen arrived, everyone officially involved took their allotted places. Among those receiving the royal party in Liverpool were the Lord Mayor, Councillor John Strong, Sir Thomas White, Chairman of the Tunnel Joint Committee, Town Clerk Walter Moon, Lord Sefton and Chief Constable A.K. Wilson. Bishops of Liverpool and Chester would offer prayers. The Guard of Honour was mounted by the 2nd Battalion, the King's Regiment, Liverpool. A detachment of the West Lancashire Territorial Army Nursing Service would be inspected by the Queen. The band of Liverpool City Police provided the music. 11:45 and the royal party arrived.
I trust that the citizens of this double city, so long famous as daring traders and matchless seamen, may for many generations find profit and comfort in this link that binds them. I am happy to declare the Mersey Tunnel open. May those who use it ever keep grateful thought of the many who struggled for long months against mud and darkness.
As the King pressed a button and the curtains drew back smoothly, few were aware that the electric mechanism was faulty and that 2 young men were cranking handles to raise the curtains in unison. The royal car led the way into the tunnel, a signal for the officials on the Liverpool side to return to the town hall for a celebratory meal and for the great crowd to begin to disperse. In Birkenhead, there was still a sense of high anticipation. Having heard the King's Liverpool speech relayed through loudspeakers, they'd only a few minutes to wait before the arrival of the royal procession, heralding a new era for the peoples and economy of Merseyside. The Birkenhead entrance was built on the site of the former Birkenhead Library, which was donated to the town by Andrew Carnegie. Here and throughout the town, there were 3 miles of crowds with people on rooftops and clinging to chimneys. The band of the Grenadier Guards, dressed in scarlet and bearskins, was in attendance. The 4th 5th Battalion of the Cheshire Regiment, based at Chester, lined the tunnel entrance, supported by the Birkenhead Institute Scout Troop. Although Lord Derby was in overall control, Captain A.C. Dawson, Birkenhead's chief constable, looked after arrangements in Birkenhead. King George V and Queen Mary completed their journey through the tunnel, accompanied by Transport Minister Leslie Hoare-Belisha of Belisha Beacon fame and Lady-in-Waiting Dowager Countess of Airlie. Among those to receive the royal party were Mayor James Coulthard, Lord Leverhulme, local MP Graham White, E.W. Tame, Town Clerk, and John Shepherd, Chief Librarian. After the speeches, the town clerk hurried across to introduce to the King Birkenhead's oldest inhabitant, 102-year-old Samuel Gillingham. At 12:30, the party moved off to open the new Central Library in Borough Road, replacing the one demolished to make way for the tunnel entrance. At first, the tunnel itself was a tourist attraction, with sightseers gathering the day after the big event to watch the traffic flow, and in those days it did. But it wasn't long before people realised the social significance of this new asset. Overnight, what had once been a major excursion now became a leisurely drive. Summer evening outings on either side of the Mersey were now a reality, and charabanc operators were not slow to see the potential of this new route, which would remain unaffected by fog and high winds. And in an era of waste not, want not, tons of rock blasted and drilled from the tunnel excavation were used to provide a new promenade at Otterspool. Horse-drawn traffic and handcarts were not allowed through, and so the luggage boats continued to operate. In 1925, 2 new boats, the Bebington and the Oxton, had been bought to improve the service, but from over 1 million vehicles carried in 1934, usage had dropped to around 50,000 by 1940. Also, to protect the Mersey Railway's interests, local buses were prohibited from using the tunnel, a situation which continued till the 1970s, but from industry's point of view, the movement of goods between factories and docks on either side of the river was now very easy. As a result, the economy grew, and social change continued apace. Wirral now contributed more people to the Liverpool workforce than to its own, and so effective had the tunnel been in bringing these 2 communities together that in the mid to late 30s there were visions of a Mersey city with joint operation of public services. The outbreak of war in 1939 focused thoughts on more immediate matters, and although city life carried on fairly normally for a while, that was all to change with the devastating bombing raids of 1941. Shipping on the Mersey and the docks on both sides of the river were destroyed. Large parts of the city centre also succumbed, and St Nicholas's Church next to the tunnel dock entrance was extensively damaged. But amid the devastation, the tunnel remained open day and night, providing a strategic route for goods for the war effort and a vital link between the defence industries on the Wirral and in Liverpool. Without doubt, the tunnel was instrumental in saving the port from closure. With the Battle of the Atlantic raging out at sea and to a large extent controlled from this part of Liverpool, the port had to be able to receive and handle the millions of tons of foodstuffs and other materials brought in by convoys of up to 60 ships which had run the gauntlet of German U-boats and destroyers. In the first year of peace, traffic returned to pre-war levels, and with prosperity increasing, by 1953 there were some 8 million vehicles using the tunnel annually. Congestion was getting worse and the ventilation system was stretched to the limit. Something had to be done. In 1958, the Mersey Tunnel Joint Committee organised a conference of Merseyside authorities to consider the problem. Once again, the bridge-tunnel debate resurfaced. Meanwhile, traffic problems were getting worse. The old transporter bridge between Widnes and Runcorn could no longer cope, and in 1961 was replaced with a new road bridge, and by 1968, Queensway was straining under the movement of some 19 million vehicles, the largest number ever. A creeping paralysis was descending on central Birkenhead and Liverpool. Birkenhead Corporation took the bull by the horns and in the process changed the face of the town centre out of all recognition. Flyovers were created to separate town centre vehicles from tunnel traffic, which would now be herded into large marshalling areas designed to contain the congestion and feed the toll booths in an orderly manner. To provide the stacking lanes, land had to be cleared and services diverted from a wide area of the town in front of the tunnel. The whole landscape in front of Central Station and near the shopping area in Conway Street changed as a result. At the same time, Birkenhead Corporation commissioned a study into traffic flows for Queensway and came up with a computer-controlled queuing system. Vehicles would be counted automatically as they entered a stacking lane, and when the lane was full, traffic lights would allow the vehicles into the toll area on a first-come, first-served basis. The perfect system, at least in theory. But despite the general public's patience observed at bus stops and in post offices, the British motorist doesn't like queues, and when the scheme was introduced, on seeing a lane filling up, would head for the nearest empty lane. The result, lots of partly filled lanes, all waiting in vain for green lights. It caused fury among motorists, some of whom had queued for over half an hour, and so the system was quietly dropped. While this scheme was being developed, the Tunnels Joint Committee had come down in favour of a second Mersey Tunnel, which would link Liverpool to Wallasey. Sponsored by Liverpool, Birkenhead and Wallasey corporations, it would cure congestion and allow for future traffic growth. The road would connect with a new mid-Wirral motorway, the M53, at Bidston Moss, providing direct access to the national motorway network. The new approach roads made use of the now closed Liverpool and North Wales railway cutting, where it passed through the sites of the old Poulton and Seacombe stations. These roads, in parts totalling 10 lanes, allowed both motorway and local traffic access to the new tunnel, while at the same time keeping non-tunnel traffic segregated. The new tunnel was planned as two separate tubes running in virtually straight lines. With only two 12-foot traffic lanes for each tunnel, far less earth would need to be removed than for a single large 4-lane tunnel like Queensway. Mott, Hay and Anderson were appointed as designers, with Nuttall Atkinson as contractors. Construction of this new tunnel involved new techniques. Following the successful boring of a 12-foot pilot tunnel, the contractors shipped to Britain the world's largest tunnel boring machine. This American-built mole, it was hoped, would not only speed up operations, but would also provide a more accurate bore. The self-propelled 45-foot-long mole, weighing 350 tons and sporting 55 steel cutters, was assembled at the Wallasey entrance and, using the pilot tunnel as a guide, began to eat its way into the rock. As it progressed, the tunnel behind was lined with precast tailor-made concrete segments and a watertight seal was created. Excavated stone was automatically conveyed back to the tunnel entrance. At its peak performance in late June 1968, progress exceeded 200 feet in 1 week, but this could not be sustained, and as conditions became wetter, the mole suffered more and more problems. Progress was halted altogether for about 6 weeks when a fault in the rock strata threatened to bring the river crashing in through the tunnel roof. An 80-foot reinforced concrete umbrella had to be constructed before the work could continue. And then calamity struck again. The mole's main bearing failed, probably due partly to the damp and salty atmosphere, and a huge complex operation to replace the bearing was both planned and carried out within the tunnel under dreadful conditions. Much to the surprise of the many prophets of doom, the replacement was successful and the mole completed its task without further mishap, breaking through at the Liverpool end on the 4th of March 1970. Alderman MacDonald Stewart was chairman of the Joint Committee at the time. But it was to be another 15 months before the first tunnel was ready for use. Ventilation, electrical and lighting works and the building of the road to link the tunnel with the A59 in Liverpool all had to be completed. Merseyside now had the first subaqueous tunnel to be built by machine anywhere in the world, and in 1968 powers were granted to allow construction of the second parallel tube. The mole began its work again, but this time with the benefit of experience and some important modifications. Work on this tunnel was completed in half the time. Confirming the tradition established in 1933 and 1934, the public was given the chance to walk through the new tunnel in return for a payment to be donated to charity. This was a one-way walk, and at the end, buses took the walkers to the ferry for the return river crossing. On the 24th of June 1971, Queen Elizabeth arrived in Liverpool for the opening ceremony.
May I therefore, Your Majesty, on behalf of all your peoples on Merseyside, invite you to set your royal seal on this inspiring moment in their history.
Mr. Chairman, I am delighted to be on Merseyside today, both in Liverpool and very shortly in Wallasey. The deep water of the River Mersey has been the foundation of Merseyside's growth. It has attracted shipping, encouraged trade, and helped to give Merseyside its own life and personality. My grandfather named the first Mersey tunnel Queensway in honour of Queen Mary. So, in honour of my father, it is with the greatest pleasure that I declare the second Mersey tunnel opened and name it Kingsway.
After naming the tunnel Kingsway to complement the title bestowed by her grandfather on the Birkenhead Tunnel, the Queen travelled through to an equally enthusiastic welcome in Wallasey. Immediately after opening, Kingsway took a third of the cross-river traffic, and that figure soon rose to half the total. Indeed, by 1975, Queensway's traffic was back to 1959 levels. This was somewhat unexpected. When Kingsway was planned, early 1960s traffic predictions suggested annual cross-river traffic would approach 49 million vehicles by 1982, when in fact it reached less than half this figure. The oil crisis of 1972 to 73, with the doubling of fuel prices and successive economic recessions which put paid to the sustained growth of the immediate post-war period, confounded the predictions. The present-day figure is still less than 25 million. Other changes have also affected the tunnels since Kingsway came into service. In 1974, the Joint Committee was abolished and responsibility passed to the new Merseyside County Council. But this was a short chapter, since by 1984 the County Council was itself abolished, and so the responsibility was handed on to the Merseyside Passenger Transport Authority, or Merseytravel as it's more generally known. Of course, it wasn't so long ago that the tunnels were no-go areas for buses, but the restrictions were lifted in the mid-70s, and following bus deregulation in 1986, tunnel services increased quite significantly. And so we return to the 1990s, 60 years on from that first celebration. Not so long ago, 500,000 vehicles a year could each take hours to cross the Mersey. Today, 24 million are across in minutes. The social and economic impact on the whole of the North West has been tremendous, and the engineering lessons learnt invaluable. But still the innovation goes on. The Mersey Tunnels fast tag scheme could well be the forerunner for our motorway toll system. Doubtless progress will bring new and fascinating achievements, but we shouldn't forget that it was the building of Queensway against huge obstacles, both natural and man-made, that brought two communities together for the benefit of both. And so it's fitting to remember the words of King George V in 1934, when he praised the men of vision, the engineers and workmen who constructed what he described as a modern miracle.